Thanks for clicking into Sports On, everybody. Chris Mannix, senior writer at Sports Illustrated, joining me now. And Chris, the NBA has updated its list of protocols to reflect the recent cancellation of a number of games as it relates to the coronavirus and the NBA being outside of a bubble. What's the biggest takeaway here with what the league's trying to do?
Well, it's all about restricting player movement at this point. The NBA has effectively said when players are on the road, they cannot leave their hotels. That's a change from several approved restaurants that the league had in each city and some looser protocols up until this point. At home, players are being told you have to stay in your house, and be just a part of your family environment and not go anywhere except for the arena or the practice facility or team approved location. So it's really about kind of creating a quasi bubble, within each market and when these players travel on the road. Now, these are the type of protocols that the NBA would have implemented early in the season or before the season. But you have to remember, these are NBA and NBPA protocols that are put in place. And the union, up until this point, believed that they wanted to maintain as much freedom for their players as was possible. But both sides have agreed after the recent run of COVID-related issues that stricter protocols needed to be put into place.
So the Players Association in complete lockstep here, urging players to essentially quarantine, not mess around with uninvited guests, that sort of a thing. I noticed they're upping their testing protocols as well. Do you expect them to be in lockstep moving forward as they try to correct this issue? I mean, they're experiencing a lot of what other major leagues have experienced up until this point.
Yeah, rest in peace, Instagram friends showing up on the road. Now, the union, I believe, is going to be in lockstep with the NBA, at least as far as they go right now, maybe even a little bit further. The question is going to be, what happens if these cancellations start to become more prevalent? What happens if instead of 5 or 6 hotspots throughout the NBA like they have right now, it becomes 12 or 15 or more, and games continue to get adversely impacted? What happens if the Board of Governors says, look, we don't want to pay, $200 million for a bubble, but it may be the only way to safely and accurately and completely finish our season? That's when I think there will be a deeper discussion with the NBAPA. But for right now, there's been no talk of going back into a bubble among the ownership ranks. I think the next step, if this does get worse, to see rosters actually expand a little bit. There's been talk of adding 1 or 2 players to the roster so that at the very least, teams will have the bare minimum 8 players they need to complete games. Now, these games may not be very good because if top players are out, it's going to be a fallout from that. But if the NBA can get these games in while they can, they're going to do it and then hope for the best.
Do you have any sense of where the line of demarcation is? Before the season began, Adam Silver did say that he would shut things down if it reached the point where they felt like safety was as big of a concern, in order to do that. I mean, how many games, how many cancellations do you get the sense that it's going to take?
I don't think there's a number to it just yet, because while, players getting infected is a problem, what's wreaking havoc with the rosters is the health and safety protocol that says if a player is in close contact with somebody that tested positive, he has to be sidelined for a set number of days and quarantined and tested. That can be a lot of different guys. I mean, you're seeing with different teams, 1 player tests positive, but 3 or 4 have to sit out because those players tested positive or were around that player. You saw it in the NFL a little bit when, for example, the Broncos lost all their quarterbacks when one of their quarterbacks tested positive. It's a similar situation. So I don't think the NBA is overly concerned about player safety at this point. It's just how many players might a team lose if 1 player tests positive or if 1 player is in close contact with a positive person. So these are all things that the NBA is trying to work through. And that's why you're seeing with these protocols, it's just all about trying to keep these guys siloed off and away from as many people outside their team as possible.
Over the course of the NFL season, we heard more and more players become more vocal about their own health and safety concerns, being frustrated with the integrity of the competition. Do you get any sense right now that some of that frustration is growing, especially with the urge to isolate and quarantine for potentially the duration of the season, or is it still too early to sense that sort of thing from the player's side?
No, I think it definitely is frustrating. I've talked to some players who are frustrated with the protocols that say what I said, where it's, if I'm around a guy that tests positive, all of a sudden I have to, be in quarantine for 7 days. They don't see why that number isn't shortened and why 3 or 4 positive or negative tests isn't enough for that to happen. So I think players feel that form of frustration. I think they're pushing for an expansion of rosters. So Jared Dudley point this out on social media during the day, where he said, look, add 1 or 2 players to the roster. It makes sense. I think that, again, is the next likely step for the NBA as they try to combat this until hopefully things get better.
All right, Chris Mannix of Sports Illustrated, thanks for being with us.
You got it.